Welcome back, everyone, to another Explainer. Today, we're taking a really fascinating journey straight into the human psyche. We're going to look at a deeply profound paradox that psychologists have actually been studying for decades. And that is how the awareness of death can, surprisingly, deepen our everyday engagement with life. I know, it sounds totally counterintuitive, right? But by looking at the very end of life, we can actually reverse engineer a much more meaningful present for ourselves.
So I want you to stop and just ask yourself right now, what will you regret most? It's a really heavy question for sure, but it sets the emotional stakes for exactly what we're about to unpack. We spend so much of our lives just postponing joy, prioritizing productivity, and trying to adhere to social expectations, basically assuming we've got endless time. But what happens when that time actually runs out? What kind of clarity emerges when all those everyday pretenses are completely stripped away?
Okay, let's dive into this because we aren't just looking at random anecdotal stories today. We're grounding all of this in a brilliant peer-reviewed paper from the International Journal for Multidisciplinary Research. The researchers, Shivangi Hardal Singh and Dr. Mohini Mittal, took Bronnie Ware's incredibly famous observations of the terminally ill, the top 5 regrets of the dying, and they distilled them into actionable clinical psychology. They've basically taken these deathbed memoirs and transformed them into this incredibly useful framework for preventive mental health.
So here is our roadmap for today's Explainer. Number 1, the psychology of regret. Number 2, authenticity and the overwork trap. 3, the cost of silenced emotions. 4, reclaiming friendships. And finally, number 5, permitting happiness.
Starting right off with Section 1, the psychology of regret, a portal to transformation. Typically, we just see regret as a flat-out failure, but therapeutically, it's actually considered a moral emotion. It's where we evaluate our past choices against our own deeply internalized ideals. Now, looking at it from a cognitive behavioral perspective, if that regret stays chronic, it just feeds anxiety, depression, and perfectionism. But, and this is the key, from an existential viewpoint, regret is absolutely crucial psychological feedback. It's literally telling us where we're out of alignment with our true values.
So we have to make a really vital shift here. We have to move away from self-condemnation, where feeling like things are meaningless just breeds more despair, and instead step through what they call a portal to transformation. By actively confronting our existential vacuums, looking honestly at what we've missed, we can consciously choose our current path. And this brilliantly illustrates how therapeutic approaches use this exact framework to take someone from a state of total helplessness into true empowered agency.
Moving on to Section 2, authenticity and the overwork trap, the burden of the ideal self.
This is where we combine that internal struggle for personal authenticity with the immense, almost crushing societal pressure to over-identify with what we do for a living. Just listen to these first 2 regrets observed by Bronnie Ware. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, and I wish I hadn't worked so hard. It is an absolute tragedy how easily we just hand over our own life narratives to cultural scripts. We trade our genuine true desires for this conditional self-acceptance that's entirely based on how productive we are or what our parents and peers expect of us.
To really understand this, we can look to psychologist Carl Rogers and his concept of congruence. Basically, congruence is the psychological health that bubbles up when your day-to-day experience and your true self-concept are completely 100% aligned. When you live outwardly in ways that actually contradict your inward truth, it just creates massive exhaustion. But when you align them, you unlock this incredible, natural vitality of self-actualization.
Notice the stark contrast here between these two sides. The socialized self just blindly obeys duty and constantly equates productivity with self-worth. It uses what existentialists call the busyness defense. You know what I mean? Just filling every single second with frantic activity to shield ourselves from facing our own inner emptiness. But, in complete contrast, the authentic self seeks spontaneity, genuine connection, and real restorative rest. Because external success, it very often just conceals complete inner depletion.
The researchers highlight this fascinating clinical case of a 42-year-old physician who was facing severe burnout. So, how did he reverse it? Well, step 1, he identified the rigid belief driving all that exhaustion, which for him was, I must never disappoint my family. Step 2, through therapy, he practiced boundary setting and Socratic questioning to actually challenge that deeply held narrative. And then step 3, he realigned with his intrinsic values. He had always wanted to be a wildlife photographer, so he actively integrated that passion into his life and scaled back his clinical work. And the result? His mood lifted almost immediately because his actions finally matched his values. It's like a giant puzzle piece snapping into place.
Let's move to Section 3, The cost of silenced emotions, the weight of forbidden affects.
Right here, we are examining the heavy physiological and psychological toll of suppressing our true feelings just to keep the peace. The third great regret of the dying is literally, I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. We silence our true feelings all the time to avoid conflict or to meet social expectations. But here's the crazy thing about unspoken emotions. Whether it's deep anger or profound love, they don't just magically disappear. They actually become embodied. They physically manifest as tension, depression, or just this profound, heavy sense of disconnection from everyone around us.
Psychologists actually refer to these as forbidden affects. These are totally natural emotions, like anger, sadness, fear, that we learn super early on in life are quote-unquote socially unacceptable to display. Emotion regulation theory shows us that chronic inhibition of these emotions literally leads to psychological fragmentation. We essentially numb ourselves, which then slowly erodes our relationships through this polite, awkward distance, and we just bury all our unhealed injuries behind a fake smile.
Consider this wildly powerful clinical narrative from the paper. There was a 70-year-old widow who carried decades, literally decades of resentment toward her late husband, but she was terrified that expressing it would disrespect his memory. Guided therapy helped her through 3 specific steps. First, acknowledging that fear. Second, composing an unsent letter expressing both her deep resentment and her love. And third, finally reading that letter aloud. Doing this released decades of pent-up somatic tension. Speaking her emotional truth actually literally stabilized her blood pressure. I mean, no way, right? The mind-body connection is just undeniable.
On to Section 4, Reclaiming Friendships, Connection as Biology.
For this one, we need to completely reframe how we view social connection. It's not just some sentimental luxury we enjoy on the weekends. It is a fundamental, biological survival need. The fourth regret is, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. Now, friendships rarely fade because of some big, dramatic conflict. They mostly fade through simple, quiet inattention. We get busy with our careers, our families, and we just kind of withdraw. But the loss of friendship often mirrors an emotional disconnection from ourselves, which eventually leads to severe emotional dysregulation and deep existential anxiety.
And this brings us right to Martin Seligman's PERMA model of flourishing. Positive psychology places relationships that are right in the middle at the absolute core of human flourishing and life satisfaction. So the crucial point is that nurturing your friendships through mindful presence and shared moments will almost always provide way more enduring joy than massive professional achievements.
We really have to juxtapose our modern culture against our actual human biology here. We constantly idolize cultural independence, the nonstop hustle and complete rugged self-reliance. The source text actually highlights a 45-year-old entrepreneur who felt entirely empty after selling his company simply because he had mistaken networking contacts for genuine human connection. Contrast that with biological interdependence. Interpersonal neurobiology tells us that the brain is a social organ. We are literally wired for proximity, for empathy, and for resonance with other human beings.
And finally, Section 5, Permitting Happiness, the Choice of Joy. This totally challenges the deeply ingrained idea that happiness is just something that happens to us based on our circumstances, rather than a permitted choice that we actively make. This final regret is deceptively simple. I wish I had let myself be happier. But man, it reveals the immense tragedy of living in a psychological prison where happiness is just perpetually postponed, whether it's because of habit, fear, or guilt. People at the end of their lives often realize that joy was actually available to them the entire time, but they just never permitted themselves to experience it.
And this happens largely because of something called the hedonic treadmill. It's our brain's tendency for satisfaction to fade super quickly after we achieve something, which causes us to constantly replace rest with brand new goals. We just get utterly trapped in this conditional thinking. Oh, I'll be happy when I get that promotion, or I'll finally relax and travel after retirement. But the dying, who are entirely stripped of those future pursuits, often discover immense joy in simple, present moment pleasures. Mindfulness actually counters this treadmill by anchoring our attention right here, right now, in the present moment.
Let's look at one last case study from the paper, a 40-year-old accountant dealing with perpetual, nonstop anxiety. He had to learn how to deconstruct this totally false dichotomy between responsibility and happiness. So, step 1 was uncovering his incredibly irrational core belief, which was, if I stop worrying, everything will instantly fall apart. Step 2 involved introducing daily mindfulness and gratitude journaling so he could observe those thoughts without getting totally fused to them. And step 3 was simply consciously granting himself the permission to just relax and smile. As we wrap up this explainer today, I really want to leave you with this profound therapeutic reflection to chew on. What would it mean to allow yourself moments of pure contentment even in the midst of complete imperfection? The ultimate lesson from those at the very end of their lives is that happiness absolutely requires your permission. It is a conscious choice to stop postponing your presence. So whatever you do, please don't wait for the end to figure it all out. Choose joy. Choose it right now, today. Thank you so much for joining me, and as always, keep learning.